Why was the rifle in her hand still warm, though she had never fired it? The desert was alive with fire. Mortars shook the earth as if the ground itself resented the weight of men. Rifles cracked through the haze, a broken chorus of survival. Dust bled into the air until the horizon vanished. Soldiers shouted, their voices colliding in the storm. And amid it all, one woman lay flat against rubble, cheek pressed to a battered rifle that had already betrayed her. The weapon was jammed, the sights bent, the target impossibly far. Every variable screamed failure. And yet her breathing slowed. The chaos outside did not matter. Not the mortars, not the crack of bullets snapping overhead, not the stench of metal dust and burning fuel. She moved as though time itself had granted her permission. Her finger steadied against the trigger. For a moment, just one, the world held its breath with her. When the shot finally came, it did more than slice through the battlefield. It cut open something long buried. It revealed a truth no one in Camp Resolute was ready to face. A truth that had been waiting, smoldering in silence, for the right moment to rise. Before the storm, before the name that would return like a ghost from the grave, there was only quiet. The quiet of monotony, the quiet of being unseen. Camp Resolute, Kandahar Province. A lonely outpost held together by sandbags and stubbornness. 60 soldiers manned its walls, 60 pairs of boots packing the dust in rhythm with routine. Radios squawked their predictable check-ins. Generators hummed. The desert stretched endless, unblinking beyond the wire. Weeks passed like this. Dust storms, dry meals, small talk forced into existence just to break the silence. Among them was Nora Caldwell. She was the one behind the desk, behind the paperwork, behind the calls. She typed faster than anyone. Her reports were meticulous, her records airtight. Yes, sir. Always soft, always precise, never loud. In the eyes of most, she was nothing more than a paperweight in fatigues. Captain Grant Mercer saw to it that no one forgot it. Mercer was the poster image of a soldier. Square jaw, broad shoulders, voice that carried across the yard. He lived for the kind of attention Nora never wanted. In front of the unit, he let his words cut casually, with laughter always waiting to follow. Administrative baggage, he'd said once, grinning as the others chuckled. She's here because the regs say we need a clerk, not because we need her. The laughter that followed was louder than the generator outside, louder than the pulse hammering in Nora's ears. She didn't respond. She never did. She only lowered her eyes back to the file she'd been holding, hands steady even when her chest felt like it was closing in. Most of the unit laughed with Mercer, most, but not all. Private Cole noticed the little things others didn't. The way Nora carried herself, balanced and alert, as if her center of gravity was always aware of danger no one else sensed. At 19, he lacked the courage to say it aloud, but in quiet moments he wondered. Then came the alarm. At 1400 hours, the rip through the desert stillness, red lights flashing across the compound walls. Men bolted upright, eyes wide, hearts in their throats. From the ridges to the north and east, dust rose in thick columns. Not weather, not wind, a storm of men. Scouts, reports came jagged, frantic, but clear enough. 180 fighters, moving fast, closing in. This wasn't a probing raid. This wasn't harassment. This was an attempt to wipe Camp Resolute off the map. The first mortar struck, turning sand into a crater. Shrapnel tore through a bunker, soldiers stumbling and coughing in the dust. Rifles snapped to shoulders, helmets yanked down, boots pounding against concrete as men scrambled for firing positions. The thin defenses groaned against the onslaught, like old hinges about to give way. "Get air on station," Mercer barked into his radio, voice cracking under the strain. The reply was brutal. "Air cover 20 minutes out. 20 minutes the camp might not have." Another mortar struck. An RPG screamed into the sky and buried itself into a tower, coughing concrete and twisted rebar into the air. Cole hit the ground, lungs choking on the dust. His heart hammered so violently he thought it might split his chest open. When he looked up, he saw Mercer shoving an M4 into Nora's chest. The rifle's last jam was unresolved, its guts fouled, chamber rusted by sand. It was less a weapon and more a cruel joke. Mercer's grin was venom, sharp and mocking. "Here, secretary, try not to point it at yourself." The expectation was clear. She would freeze, she would panic, she would prove him right. But her hands told a different story. Nora dropped behind cover, inspected the weapon in seconds. Selector, bolt, chamber, fingers precise, efficient. Movements so quick they looked rehearsed, as if her hands had lived this dance before. His breath caught. This wasn't fumbling. This wasn't luck. This was discipline. The kind a desk sergeant had no business knowing. Another blast tore through the eastern wall. Screams bled through the radio. "Breach! Breach!" Mercer roared for ammo, voice already unraveling. Nora didn't rush. She tilted her head, listening. Her eyes tracked a faint crack cut through the noise, followed by a delayed echo. Sharp, repeating, precise. Her lips barely moved. "Sniper, northeast ridge." "Blink to what?" "Tell Mercer to move second squad south 20 meters. If not, they'll be caught in the next volley." Her tone was calm, certain. Sprinted through the haze, desperate to relay it. Mercer swatted the warning away with a dismissive wave, too consumed with barking into his radio. And then it came. This report. A soldier spun, chest torn open, blood staining the sand. Second squad scattered, scrambling for survival. Froze, horror crushing him. She had called it before it happened, exactly, step for step. Back at the supply bunker, Nora reloaded her vest. Magazines aligned by touch, medical kits secured tight, tourniquets looped for one-handed use. Every movement silent, efficient. Stumbled in behind her, watching with wide eyes. No admin clerk packed gear like this, not one. On her wrist, hidden beneath dirt and sweat, he saw it, a matte black watch, numbers glowing faint in the dust. Pressure, wind, altitude shifts. A device whispered about in barrack stories, the kind issued only to men who didn't officially exist. His stomach dropped. The camp radio screamed again. East wall breached, hostiles inside. Automatic fire hammered so close the walls shivered. Nora slid the last magazine into place, drew a blade from her vest. The steel caught the weak sunlight. Then she stepped out into the open. A fighter charged, AK raised, eyes locked with fury. Froze. His finger wouldn't move, his training useless under the weight of terror. His throat closed, his lungs burned. Nora moved first. The knife flashed once, clean, silent. The man collapsed, its feet, throat spilling into the sand. Before could comprehend it, she shoved him down behind cover, snatched his rifle, and dropped 3 more attackers with short, controlled bursts. Her stance was rooted, her recoil absorbed with muscle memory. Not luck, not desperation. A past written in gunpowder. Stomach turned, who was she? Across the compound, Mercer's voice carried even through the smoke. "Caldwell, stop playing soldier." His tone was cracked with fury. But she wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the ridge. Through dust and muzzle flashes, she found him, a man with a radio on his back, calm as if the battlefield was a chessboard under his hand. He wasn't firing. He was directing. Pointing, gesturing, shifting squads like a conductor. The attack moved with inhuman coordination. "That's him," Nora muttered. The words weren't meant for anyone but heard. "The conductor of the chaos. Cut him out, the whole symphony collapses." Another mortar landed close, shaking his ribs until he thought they'd crack. Nora pulled him up, dragging him across the yard. She didn't stumble. She didn't hesitate. Mercer blocked her path, face red, dust caked into sweat. He shoved his own rifle into her chest, spitting venom with every word. "You think you're special. You think you can do better than the rest of us. Here, try mine. Maybe then you'll understand the difference between a toy and a weapon." He crossed his arms, expecting her to fumble. Nora caught it instantly. Double feed jam, casing stuck deep. Improperly cleared, dangerous. 9 seconds later, the weapon was whole again. His jaw dropped, Mercer's grin faltered. For the first time, doubt cracked his certainty. Nora slid prone against shattered concrete, rifle tight to her shoulder. Breathing slow, the ridge in her sights, the commander still gesturing, still alive. 760 meters, she whispered. Shook his head, you. She didn't answer. The battlefield thundered, and yet in her world silence reigned. What kind of clerk bore the scar of a rifle pressed into her shoulder? Nora lay flat, cheek pressed to the stock, her eyes steady through a bent sight post that mocked her aim. The rifle was wrong for the distance. The heat shimmer blurred the desert into waves of mirage. 760 meters stretched before her, wide as forever, yet her pulse slowed to a rhythm she trusted. The commander on the ridge moved with calm precision, gesturing fighters into position, pointing squads like a puppeteer. Bullets and mortars screamed around her, but she didn't blink. She calculated drift, drop. The math burned into her bones, every breath a metronome, every heartbeat a narrowing window. Captain Mercer loomed above her, voice dripping with scorn. Suicidal, he spat into the dirt. No one could land that shot. Cole crouched nearby, wide-eyed, lips parted in disbelief. He had seen her hands repair a rifle faster than a quartermaster, seen her pack gear no paper pusher would even know how to carry. And now he saw something else, the mark on her shoulder. A scar etched deep, fanned like a starburst across her skin where her vest had shifted. A mark only recoil could carve, not from one shot, from years of them. His throat tightened. He wanted to whisper the truth, but the word tangled on his tongue. This wasn't a clerk. Nora Caldwell exhaled slow, finding the stillness between breath. Her sights aligned on the commander's chest. The world shrank to that single point. And then, nothing. The trigger broke with no fire. The rifle jammed again. Seconds, that's all she had. Already the commander's guards were shifting closer, ready to drag him back into safety. If he disappeared into the rocks, the attack would rage until Camp Resolute was swallowed whole. Nora's hands moved without thought. Tap, rack, bang. The drill slammed into muscle memory, executed with violent precision. Chamber cleared, bolt forward, sight picture found again, finger pressed. This time the rifle answered. The report was swallowed in the chaos, but felt it in his bones. Dust leapt from the ridge. The commander's head snapped back, his body folding like a marionette with its strings cut. For a moment nothing changed. The fight roared on, wild and furious. Then it happened, the ripple. Orders died in the throats of fighters, their precision cracked, movements faltering. Confusion swept the ridges like fire through dry brush. Some militants broke into retreat, others fired blindly into the dust. The symphony of their assault, once coordinated, now collapsed into noise. Lips parted, words lost. When he finally managed to speak, it was barely a whisper. That's impossible. Around them, soldiers noticed. Fingers pointed toward the ridge. Phones appeared in trembling hands, recording what no one would believe without proof. Their secretary, quiet, unseen Nora Caldwell, had just landed a shot no sniper should have survived. Mercer stumbled back, binoculars trembling in his hands. Through the glass he saw militants dragging their fallen commander. His voice cracked, echoing words but hollow. That's impossible. The battlefield trembled with a new sound. A low thump, steady, heavy, rotor blades cutting through air. His head whipped skyward. Two US-60s appeared, sleek, black, without insignia. They flew low, door guns spitting fire into the retreating enemy. They flared hard above the camp, ropes spilling from their bellies. Figures slid down fast, hitting the ground like shadows come alive. Black-clad operators fanned across the yard, their movements sharp, practiced, lethal. Delta Force. The tide shifted in minutes. Positions reinforced. Remaining hostiles cut down with precision. Camp Resolute, moments from collapse, stood again. Soldiers peered from behind sandbags, disbelief etched into their faces as men they'd only heard about in stories now fought beside them. One operator paused, a master sergeant, hair streaked with gray beneath his helmet. His tinted lenses scanned the chaos until they found Nora. His stride faltered, his breath caught. "No way," he whispered, lowering his glasses. Then the name broke from his lips like a bullet fired into silence. Ghost. The battlefield froze, not in action but in understanding. His head jerked toward her, confusion mixing with awe, fear, reverence. Soldiers repeated the word under their breath. Ghost. The name whispered in barracks and training halls. A myth. A sniper who vanished after Operation Iron Anvil 4 years earlier. A story told in hushed voices. But the story was standing in the dirt with a smoking rifle. Nora didn't move, didn't confirm, didn't deny. Her silence was answer enough. Captain Mercer's face drained. The authority he clung to shattered like glass. The camp shifted again as a third helicopter descended, heavier, bristling with antennas. It landed hard near the command post, sand whipping into spirals. From its cabin stepped a woman in full dress uniform, her stars catching the desert sun. Major General Briggs. The chaos seemed to bow to her stride. Even in the dust and wreckage, soldiers snapped to attention, saluting without thought. Colonel's voice stammered in surprise, but Briggs never broke stride. Her eyes locked on one person. Nora Caldwell. The yard fell silent. Only the desert wind moved, carrying faint echoes of retreat. Briggs stopped before her, gaze unreadable. For a moment, even the battlefield seemed to wait. "Master Sergeant Caldwell," Briggs said at last. Her voice was even but heavy with history. "Or should I still call you Ghost?" The weight of the name fell on every man who heard it. His pulse roared in his ears. Mercer's lips parted, but no sound came. The truth, once unthinkable, now stood undeniable. Nora's mask faltered, just slightly. Her eyes flicked to the ground. A shadow crossed her face, grief sharp and raw, as if the name itself carried blood with it, but she did not deny it. The truth was out. Ghost wasn't gone. She wasn't a myth. She wasn't a clerk. She was alive, standing with dust in her hair and a rifle still warm in her hands. Briggs held a black folder marked with crimson stamps. She extended it, weighty with secrets. Nora accepted it with steady fingers, though her throat tightened. Inside were satellite photos, intercepted radio chatter, a name scrawled across the pages again and again. Yes. Briggs's voice cut like glass. He orchestrated Iron Anvil. He set the trap that killed Stevens. He's the reason the world believed you were dead. The words tore at Nora like shrapnel. Wasn't a ghost. He was flesh and bone. A man who had once trained on American soil, learning every tactic, every weakness. He knew their playbook better than they did, and he had used it against them. Nora's voice cracked low, quiet enough that only Briggs heard. "I buried Ghost with Stevens that night. I swore she wouldn't return." Her grip on the folder tightened until the paper bent. Briggs leaned closer, her eyes steel. "You can bury names. You can hide behind paperwork. But when lives depended on it, Ghost stepped out. You proved today she's still alive." Around them, soldiers pretended not to listen, but every ear strained toward the words. Even Mercer, dust-streaked, helmet clutched awkwardly, stood motionless, shame carving into his posture. He stepped forward at last. His voice was rough, stripped of arrogance. "I called you, mocked you, didn't see who you were." His gaze faltered. "You saved us all." Nora's eyes found his, steady. "You couldn't have known. Warriors don't advertise, Captain, they just serve." Mercer's lips trembled. No reply came. Still clutched his rifle, chest rising and falling like he'd run miles. He couldn't speak, but the look in his eyes was clear. Awe, respect, a strange, fragile pride. Briggs reached into her pocket again. This time she pulled a chain of dog tags dulled by years of storage. She pressed them into Nora's hand. The steel was cold, heavy. Stamped across the metal, Master Sergeant Nora L. Caldwell, Task Force Sentinel. Nora's jaw clenched. The tag slipped around her neck, the weight both anchor and resurrection. Engines roared to life as Delta operators loaded gear. Rotor wash whipped the yard into storms of sand. Soldiers lined the camp, watching. Some saluted. Others stood frozen, their world tilted on its axis. Nora boarded the waiting. She moved like she belonged. Gave her a final nod. Mercer stood back, silence carved into his shame. As the helicopter lifted, the desert fell away beneath her. The ridge where the commander had fallen glowed faintly in the dying light. But farther out, beyond sight of the camp, another figure watched, binoculars catching the sunset. His voice cold, transmitted through static. "Ghost is alive, prepare the hunt." Nora felt it, even in the air, even with the rotor wash slamming her skin. The weight of eyes unseen. Her hand closed over the rifle on her knees. The war wasn't over. It had only shifted shape. Briggs leaned across the cabin, her words low against the thunder of blades. "Operation Silent Storm begins now. You're the only one who's faced him and lived." Nora's gaze flicked to the horizon, to the weight pressing against her chest where the tags rested cold. Her voice, when it came, was steel wrapped in grief. "Then it's not just a mission," she said. "It's personal." The helicopter banked north into shadowed skis. Below, the desert sank into silence. But the hunt had already begun. How do you bury a name that refuses to stay dead? The thundered northward, slicing the night into pieces. Inside the cabin, red lights washed the steel walls, painting faces in blood-toned glow. Operators sat silent, weapons across their knees, eyes hidden behind tinted lenses. Every vibration of the rotors pressed into Nora's bones, yet she sat perfectly still, her hands folded across the cold dog tags now resting against her chest. The metal burned with memory. Stephen's voice came back first. That rough laugh, that calm steadiness that had once been her anchor. She could see him as clearly as if he were still across from her. Mud streaked across his jaw, rifle balanced easy against his knee, that unshakable grin even when everything around them crumbled. She had buried him in her mind to survive, and yet here in the rumble of his ghost leaned close, whispering truths she hadn't wanted to hear. "You thought you could bury me with the name," he would said, "but you're still here, and so is Ghost." Her jaw tightened. She kept her gaze on the open cabin door where night poured in like ink across the desert. She wouldn't blink. If she blinked, she might see his last moments again. The fire, the ambush, the sound of the trap closing around them, his hand shoving her forward into survival when his own chance was already gone. His name burned across the folder still resting on her lap. Every letter was a blade. He had been there, somewhere in the smoke of that night. He had orchestrated it, set the trap with precision that cut too deep to be coincidence. And he had won. For years he had believed he killed Ghost. For years she had let him believe it. And now he knew the truth. Across the cabin, Briggs watched her. The general's eyes were sharp but not unkind. She had seen soldiers break under less, seen them fold inward, hiding from ghosts of their own. But Caldwell didn't fold. She sat rigid, every muscle coiled like a spring. "You're quiet," Briggs said finally, her voice pitched low against the roar of the rotors. Nora didn't turn. "I buried Ghost 4 years ago." "You didn't bury her," Briggs replied. "You carried her quietly, every day, and today she carried you." The words cut deep, not with cruelty, but with truth. Nora's fingers tightened around the folder until the edges bit into her palms. "They needed saving," Nora said. "That doesn't mean Ghost is alive again." Briggs leaned forward, her stars glinting in the dim light. "That's exactly what it means." Silence settled. Operators checked their weapons, the swayed wind howling as it pushed through night air. Nora's mind turned inward, back to the camp, to Mercer's mocking grin, to his wide eyes, to the soldiers who had saluted her with trembling hands as if they were saluting a phantom. Ghost. The name wasn't hers anymore. It was a shadow draped across her shoulders, heavier than body armor, harder than steel. Her pulse steadied. She let her hand fall from the dog tags, resting on her knees where the rifle lay quiet. The weapon was worn, battered, a poor companion for what lay ahead. But she kept it close, the way one keeps a scar close. Across from her, one of the operators broke the silence. His voice was low, uncertain. "Thought you were dead." Nora's eyes flicked toward him. She didn't answer. "Everyone thought so," he continued. "Iron Anvil, whole team gone. We heard Ghost never made it out." His voice trailed, caught between reverence and disbelief. Nora's silence was sharper than words. The operator shifted uncomfortably, lowering his gaze. She didn't need to confirm. Her presence was confirmation enough. The helicopter banked hard, pushing everyone against their restraints. Below them, the desert gave way to black mountains, their jagged edges cutting into the horizon like teeth. Somewhere down there was alive, watching, waiting. She could feel it. The way predators sense each other even before the first step of the hunt. His face flashed in her memory, young, terrified, but unbroken. He had seen her for what she was, even before Mercer's authority had shattered. There had been awe in his eyes, yes, but something else too, a kind of hope. She hadn't expected to see hope in anyone's eyes again, least of all her own reflection. The helicopter dipped lower, hugging the terrain. Briggs' voice cut across the comms. "Approaching Fob Mistral. You'll have 10 hours, then we move on Silent Storm." Nora's stomach twisted. 10 hours. 10 hours to prepare to hunt the man who had once killed everything she believed in. 10 hours to step back into a role she swore she had buried. The landing was hard. Dirt and rotor wash swallowed the night as the touched down. Soldiers moved quickly, unloading crates, weapons, gear. Nora stepped into the dust, boots sinking into soil she didn't know. Around her, Fob Mistral bustled with quiet intensity. Shadows carried weapons across the yard. Maps glowed under red lights in open tents. The air tasted like secrets. Briggs led her toward a command shelter, but Nora paused at the edge. The hum of voices, the smell of coffee, the scratch of pencils across maps, it all hit her like. Once, this had been her world. Once, this had been the place where Ghost lived and breathed. Her hand brushed the dog tags again. For a moment, her chest felt hollow, as though the steel had carved out a part of her heart. Inside, screens flickered with satellite imagery. His name etched across lines of intercepted chatter. Supply routes marked with red, glowing faint on infrared maps. He wasn't hiding. He was preparing. Briggs stood tall at the head of the table. "He knows you're alive now. That changes the board." Nora studied the images, her mind clicking into patterns the way it once had before every mission. Routes, terrain, possible ambush points. Her breathing slowed again, the way it had on the ridge, the way it always did before pulling a trigger. "He'll expect me to come," she said quietly. Briggs nodded. "Good, let him." The words carried weight, almost a challenge. Nora's throat tightened. For a moment she thought of refusing, thought of turning away, walking back into silence, letting Ghost remain only a story. But her eyes drifted to a photograph pinned to the corner of the map, blurry, taken from a drone. The outline of a compound, the faint glow of heat signatures within. She saw Stephen's face overlaid on the image, his grin fading into the sand. Her voice was low, steady. "Tell me the plan." Briggs exhaled, a hint of relief. "Silent Storm begins at dawn." The operators leaned forward, maps shuffled, plans unfolded. The hunt had shape now, even if the outcome was still wrapped in shadow. Nora listened, silent as always, but inside the storm already raged. She wasn't hiding anymore, she was hunting. And though her heart still carried grief like shrapnel, her pulse carried something else, purpose. Why did the sound of zippers and buckles feel heavier than gunfire? At Fob Mistral the night before dawn, the air was alive with motion. Operators moved in silence, tightening straps, checking optics, laying out rows of ammunition that gleamed dull under red lamps. Generators hummed low. Radios whispered codes. Every corner of the base pulsed with the rhythm of preparation, but for Nora Caldwell, the noise was almost unbearable. She sat on a crate in the farthest corner, stripping her rifle down to its bones. Each part lay clean on the table: barrel, bolt, firing pin. Her hands moved without pause, but her thoughts pulled elsewhere, back into a night she had tried for years to forget. Iron Anvil. The ambush that had ended everything. The desert had looked the same then, jagged ridges against endless stars, the promise of silence just before the storm. Their convoy had moved slow, cautious, headlights blacked out. Stevens had been beside her in the Humvee, one hand loose on the wheel, the other resting on his rifle. "They'll try something tonight," he'd said, his grin not matching the words. "They've been too quiet." Nora had nodded, scanning the darkness with eyes that caught every flicker. Her gut had agreed. Quiet was never safe. The memory sliced sharp. The first explosion had swallowed the lead vehicle. Flames tore through the night. Muzzle flashes sparked across both ridges. Stevens had slammed the brake, throwing them sideways, shouting orders into the radio. Nora had already grabbed her rifle, pressed cheek to stock, firing into shadows before she even had time to think. But it hadn't been enough. Had planned every move. Their routes, their timing, their blind spots. The attack had been a cage snapping shut. The last thing she remembered was Stevens shoving her down, his voice cutting through chaos. "Move! Live, damn it!" Then the world had collapsed into fire. Her hands trembled now, just slightly, as she reassembled the rifle. She forced the pieces back into place, each click a denial of memory. But the scar across her shoulder burned hot, as if the past refused to loosen its grip. Footsteps drew close. Nora looked up. Cole stood awkwardly in front of her, helmet tucked under his arm, his youth obvious against the hardened shadows of Delta operators. His eyes darted to the rifle, then back to her. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said. "You didn't." Her voice was even, though inside she fought to keep the walls intact. He hesitated, then sat on the crate beside her. He looked small, swallowed in his gear, but his gaze held something she didn't expect. Not fear, not pity, something closer to belief. "I saw what you did at Resolute," he said, almost a whisper. "The shot, the way you moved, that wasn't luck. That was," he trailed off, shaking his head as if the word refused to form. "Experience," she finished for him. He swallowed, ghost. The name hung heavy. Nora set her rifle aside, her eyes fixed on him. "Names don't matter. What matters is surviving the next fight." "But names tell the story," pressed, his voice fragile but insistent. "They tell us what's possible." For a moment, Nora almost saw herself reflected in him, not the hardened lines but the fire in his chest. The same fire she once carried when she thought wars could be won clean. She looked away, unwilling to let him see too much. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will test every ounce of you." He hesitated, then nodded, standing slow. As he walked away, Nora felt something shift, not in him, in her. The boy's belief was dangerous. Hope was always dangerous, but it stirred something she had buried with Stevens. Across the yard, Briggs stood near the command tent, speaking low with her staff. Maps glowed under red lights, her finger stabbing at points marked in ink. Silent storm had shape now, a raid into the mountains, a strike against, a chance to cut the serpent before it shed another skin. Nora forced herself to her feet, rifle slung back across her chest. She crossed the yard and stepped into the tent, the air thick with sweat and coffee. The map lay open, a compound nestled in the crook of two ridges, guarded but not impenetrable. Briggs looked up as Nora entered. "We hit him at dawn," she said. "Fast, precise, no time for him to vanish." Nora studied the layout, tracing her finger over the terrain. Roots in, angles of fire, dead ground where the enemy might lie in wait. Her mind locked into the patterns, the way it once had every time Ghost had been called upon. "You're expecting resistance," Nora said. Briggs nodded. "Knows you're alive, he'll prepare for it." Nora's jaw tightened. "Good." The word surprised even her. The room stilled. Operators exchanged glances. They didn't question her tone, didn't need to. They knew the weight behind it. Later, alone in the barracks, Nora sat on the edge of the bunk, dog tags cold against her chest. She let herself close her eyes. Just once. Stephen's face came again, sharp as the day he died. "You don't have to do this," his memory whispered. But she knew she did. Morning came hard. The base stirred before the sun, men moving like shadows, blades of light cutting across steel. Nora tightened her vest, checked her optics, ran her hand across the scar on her shoulder like a ritual. The helicopters waited, rotors already spinning, impatient to lift. Climbed aboard behind her, nerves etched across his features. She didn't look at him, but she felt the weight of his presence. He was too young, too raw, but he was here, and maybe that mattered. Briggs gave the signal. The rose, the ground falling away in violent gusts of sand. Ahead, the mountains loomed, their jagged edges catching the first light of dawn. Nora's heart pounded steady, but her mind was silent. The hunt had begun. And though she carried grief like a scar, she carried something else too. Purpose. The name Ghost was alive again, and this time it wasn't hiding. Why did the hum of rotor blades sound so much like memory? The helicopters skimmed low across the desert, their silhouettes stretched long against the coming dawn. Inside, silence reigned. Operators sat still, weapons balanced across their laps, helmets hiding faces carved by focus. The air was hot with tension, thick enough that every breath felt heavier than armor. Nora Caldwell sat near the open door, eyes fixed on the jagged ridges rising ahead. The mountains were black against the bleeding sky, teeth waiting to bite. She pressed her back against the steel, letting the vibrations carry into her spine. The familiar rhythm pulled at something buried deep. An old night, another mission, another ambush. Iron Anvil. The flashback was uninvited, as it always was. The desert had been the same, the ridges too, and the silence, the kind of silence that feels manufactured, staged, like the world is holding its breath because something terrible is about to exhale. Stevens had been beside her in the convoy, his grin cocky even under the glow of NVGs. He'd nudged her shoulder, whispering through the headset. "Bet you $5 we get contact before midnight." She had rolled her eyes, answering with the faintest smile. "You never win your bets." He'd grinned wider. "Tonight I will." And then the explosion came. Now on the helicopter, Nora's hands gripped the rifle. The memory was sharp, cruel, as if the desert itself was conspiring to replay it. She blinked hard, dragging herself back to the present, back to the operators around her who didn't know how ghosts could claw at living flesh. Across from her, Cole sat ramrod stiff, helmet slightly askew, fingers clenched so tight on his rifle the knuckles had gone white. His eyes flicked nervously between her and the floor. Young, too young. She felt a strange pang of recognition, like looking at herself years ago before scars had been carved into her skin. "Breathe," she said quietly. His head snapped up. "What?" "Breathe, in through your nose, out slow." He swallowed hard, obeyed. The trembling in his shoulders eased just slightly. His gaze softened, searching hers for something unspoken. "Were you ever scared?" he asked, his voice cracked with youth. Nora's lips pressed into a line. A dozen answers coiled in her chest, but only one slipped free. "Every time." Nodded, his shoulders dropping, as if the honesty gave him permission to be human. The helicopter banked left, and their conversation ended in the thunder of rotor blades. Briggs' voice cut across comms. 5 minutes out." The words fell like a hammer. Operators shifted, checking weapons. Fingers snapped safeties off. Eyes sharpened. No chatter, no bravado, only the ritual of men and women who had danced with death too often to waste words. Nora looked to the mountains. A faint glow of dawn spilled across the rocks, illuminating scars carved into the ridges, trails, bunkers, shadows that weren't natural, had prepared. She could feel it the way a wolf feels another in the dark. The helicopter dipped lower. Rotor washed tore at the sand, dust spiraling upward like smoke. The compound appeared in the valley below, low walls of concrete, narrow alleys, a central courtyard barely visible through haze. From above, it looked asleep, but Nora's instincts screamed otherwise. "This is a cage," she muttered. Leaned closer. "What?" She didn't repeat it. The flared hard, skidding into landing zones just outside the compound's perimeter. Boots hit the ground fast, operators fanning out in silence. Nora dropped last, rifle tight, eyes scanning every angle, every shadow. The air was wrong, too still, too expectant. Briggs moved quickly, pointing operators into positions, her voice low but sharp. Alpha left, Bravo right, Caldwell Ridge overwatch. Nora nodded, slipping toward the rocks with trailing close behind. She climbed fast, Boots finding purchase where others would slip. At the crest, she lay prone, sight pressed to her rifle, glass sweeping the compound. Shadows moved inside, subtle, coordinated. "They're waiting," she whispered. Froze, "Then why land here?" "Because he wants us here." Her voice was steady, but her chest felt tight. Below, Alpha Team breached a side wall, charges flashing white in the dawn. Dust blew outward as the squad disappeared inside. Bravo mirrored on the far side, slipping through a narrow breach. The compound swallowed them whole. Silence followed. Then, like a memory reborn, the world erupted. Automatic fire thundered from the rooftops. RPGs screamed, hammering against the perimeter. Figures poured from hidden tunnels, their movement too precise, too rehearsed. Men, not rabble, not disorganized fighters. Soldiers trained, disciplined, patient. Nora's scope caught one, then another. She exhaled, squeezed. Two figures dropped before their muzzles flashed. Fired beside her, his shots clumsy but desperate. The ridge shook under the violence. Her mind flickered again, cruel and relentless, back to Iron Anvil. The ambush had been just like this, sudden, overwhelming, absolute. She had fired until her barrel glowed, until Stevens dragged her down and shielded her with his body. His voice in her ear. "Run, damn you!" The explosion that followed. The silence after. Her chest seized. She blinked hard, dragging herself back into the present. This wasn't then. She wasn't 19 anymore, and Stevens was gone. Below, Bravo was pinned in a narrow alley. Alpha traded fire from a collapsed wall. The compound was a kill box and had built it perfectly. Nora shifted, finding her sight picture again. She saw them, rooftop spotters, men moving like chess pieces across the courtyard, guiding the fight with silent signals. She lined up, exhaled, squeezed. One down. Another fell seconds later. The fight tilted just slightly, like a scale refusing to stay balanced. His voice cracked. "We can't hold this." "We don't hold," Nora cut him off, her tone cold steel. "We break it." He swallowed, eyes locked on her, and for a fleeting second she knew he believed her. Through the haze, a single figure emerged in the compound. Tall, composed, his posture calm amid the chaos. Even through the scope, even across distance, Nora knew. Yep. Her pulse slowed. The world narrowed. She tracked him through the glass, her finger brushing the trigger. And then he stopped, turned. Even across distance, she felt his eyes meet hers. He raised a hand, calm as a conductor, and the compound shifted again. Fighters peeled back, changing formation. New shadows poured from hidden doors. It wasn't panic. It wasn't retreat. It was strategy. A message. He knew she was here. Her chest burned. Stevens' memory clawed inside her, begging her to fire, but moved too quickly, vanishing behind concrete before her shot could find him. cursed under his breath, panic flickering across his face. That was him, that was. I know, Nora said. Her voice was low, deadly. He's alive. The battlefield roared, but inside she was silent. Silent like a storm gathering force. Why did every gunshot sound like a question with no answer? The compound walls shook as another RPG tore through a corner, spraying dust and stone into the courtyard. Muzzle flashes lit the morning haze. The air was thick with screams, ricochets, orders half heard over the roar of battle. From her perch on the ridge, Nora Caldwell's scope swept across the chaos below. Each exhale was measured, each trigger pull precise. A rooftop spotter dropped, then another. Every shot shifted the balance, just enough to give Delta operators room to breathe. But for each body that fell, two more emerged from hidden doors, had filled the compound with men the way a trap is filled with teeth. Cole crouched beside her, his rifle trembling in his hands. He fired, missed, fired again. The sound of his breath was ragged, breaking through his comms like static. I can't, his voice cracked. They don't stop. Nora's hand shot out, gripping his vest, pulling him low as a burst of gunfire chewed the rock where his head had been seconds before. Her eyes burned into his. You breathe, she said. You shoot. One man at a time, that's how you stop them. His throat worked, eyes wide, but he nodded. His next shot steadied, barely, and a fighter crumpled in the dust below. The radio crackled in her ear, Briggs' voice sharp, urgent. Bravo's pinned, East Alley, Alpha pushing west but blocked by machine guns. Caldwell, I need openings. Copy. Nora shifted, scope finding the source. A PKM dug into rubble, barrel glowing red, spitting streams of lead into Bravo's cover. She exhaled, squeezed. The gunner dropped. The weapon clattered useless into the dust. Bravo, move, Briggs barked. Figures scrambled, pouring out of cover, but the reprieve was brief. Another hidden nest opened fire from above, pinning them again. Nora felt her chest tighten. It was iron anvil all over again. Different men, different walls, but the same trap. Had studied the rhythm of war and turned it into a snare. He wasn't trying to win this fight quickly. He was trying to bleed them out. Her finger hovered on the trigger, but her mind split in two. In the haze of gunfire and smoke, she saw Stevens again, his hand on her back shoving her forward, his voice in her ear. Run. Her breath caught. Nora's voice tugged her back, desperate. Where do I shoot? She blinked hard, forcing Stevens' ghost away. She pointed with two fingers. Windows, second floor, keep them blind. Nodded, jaw clenched, firing in controlled bursts, each shot steadier than the last. His fear hadn't vanished, it never would, but he was fighting through it. Nora's scope slid across the compound again, and then she saw him. For a moment her heart stopped. He stood in the courtyard, calm amid the chaos, his posture as composed as if this were a rehearsal. His eyes swept the battlefield with calculation, his hand lifting, signaling fighters into formation. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't even pressed for time. He was watching, learning, testing them. Testing her. Her chest constricted. She drew in a long breath, sights locking on him. But even as she steadied, stepped behind cover, vanishing before she could fire. The message was clear: you can't reach me, not yet. Her jaw clenched, anger threatening to crack the composure she clung to. Below, Bravo shouted over comms, "We're dry, out of ammo." Panic surged in the voice, the kind of panic that spreads faster than shrapnel. Nora's eyes snapped to the alley. Bravo squad huddled low, magazines empty, their rifles little more than dead weight. Fighters closed in fast, weapons raised. His voice trembled, "They're done." "Not yet." Nora slung her rifle, rose into a crouch and broke cover. Eyes went wide. "Wait, what are you?" She slid down the ridge fast, boots carving furrows into the dust. Bullets snapped past her, whining off stone, but she didn't slow. She hit the ground hard, rolling into a collapsed wall where Bravo was pinned. Soldiers stared at her, eyes wide, disbelief cutting through their fear. Who one started? Spare mags, Nora barked, tossing her own into their laps. Her hands moved like lightning, stripping rifles, slamming bolts, clearing jams. You're not done yet. Her voice cut through panic like steel. For a moment, they obeyed instinctively as if they'd trained under her before. Weapons clacked back into life. Bravo rose as one, firing into the alley, pushing back the fighters who had closed too soon. Scrambled down behind her, his chest heaving. He dropped beside her, fumbling with his mag pouch, shoving ammo toward the squad. His hands shook, but his eyes carried something new. Resolve. Nora pressed her back against the wall, catching her breath. The scar across her shoulder burned, sweat stinging her eyes. For a brief second, she let herself feel it, the exhaustion, the weight. She was no ghost. She was human, and her body screamed with every choice. But then a voice echoed through the compound. Deep, confident, calm. Yes. Though she couldn't make out the words, she didn't need to. The effect was immediate. Fighters who had faltered again. Their movements sharpened. Their fire grew precise. His voice turned chaos into order. Nora's blood ran cold. He's here, she muttered. Turned wide-eyed. You saw him. Her gaze hardened. I felt him. Briggs' voice cut in, sharp with strain. We can't hold this. Caldwell, call it. The words twisted in her gut. To call retreat was to leave alive. To stay was to risk being buried in another iron anvil. She closed her eyes just for a breath. Stephen's face came again. His grin, his voice, his sacrifice. Don't run from this. Her eyes snapped open. She grabbed her radio. Negative, we push. Here, this is the chance. Silence followed, heavy and thick. Briggs didn't argue, she didn't need to. The decision was made. Nora chambered around, rose from cover, and stepped back into the storm. Every instinct screamed she was walking into fire. But some storms you don't escape. Some storms you carry with you. Why did the air taste of ash when no fire burned nearby? The compound was a furnace of sound. Gunfire rattled off the walls, each shot ricocheting like a scream trapped in stone. Smoke crawled across the courtyards, blending with dawn until the sky itself seemed bruised. Nora Caldwell moved through it with her rifle pressed to her shoulder, her breath steady even as the world fractured around her. Bravo was holding now, barely. Muzzle flashes lit the alley in frantic bursts, each soldier firing with the grim knowledge that their magazines bled empty faster than their courage. Cole was among them, pressed low against the wall, his young face smudged with dust and disbelief. His eyes searched for her every few seconds, as if tethered to her presence. She didn't look back, she couldn't. Her scope swept the upper floors. She found one fighter, then another, both cutting down Delta operators with cruel precision. Exhale. Squeeze. Two bodies collapsed into the dust. Her rifle kicked back against her shoulder, the pain grounding her, reminding her she was still here, still alive, still carrying the name she'd tried to bury. Ghost. The radio spat static. Briggs' voice was strained. Alpha down to 5. West wall collapsing. If we don't breach the inner compound, we lose the window. Nora pressed her cheek harder into the stock. The inner compound. That was where waited. She felt it like a pulse in her chest. The trap wasn't meant to kill them quickly, it was meant to lure them deeper. Every move they made, he anticipated. Every corner, every wall, designed to drain their strength before he showed his hand. But she didn't care. She wanted him close. She wanted his eyes to meet hers. She shouted over the chaos, "On me." He scrambled toward her, tripping over debris, rifle clutched tight. His chest heaved with every breath, but he didn't falter. She pulled him into cover, her hand gripping his vest. "We push with Alpha," she said. His mouth opened, panic in his eyes. "Push into that." Yes, her tone left no room for argument. You wanted to know if fear ever leaves. It doesn't, you move anyway. For a heartbeat, he just stared. Then slowly he nodded. They broke cover together, sprinting across the courtyard as bullets chewed the ground around their boots. Nora's rifle barked in short, controlled bursts, each shot deliberate, each kill a calculation. Stumbled, nearly falling, but she yanked him forward by the collar, dragging him into the breach where Alpha regrouped. Inside the compound, the air was darker, hallways choked with dust and shadow, the sound of boots pounding against concrete, the stench of sweat, oil, gunpowder. Every step echoed with the memory of Iron Anvil, with the convoy trapped, with Stevens shouting in her ear. She shoved it down, focused. Alpha's leader, blood streaking his sleeve, glanced at her. "We're cut in half. West stairwell's gone." "East," Nora said instantly, her voice cut sharper than his. "It'll bottleneck them, buy us seconds." He hesitated, then nodded. In this chaos, her certainty was enough. They pushed forward. The stairwell was narrow, lit only by thin slits of dawn bleeding through broken windows. Shadows moved above, fighters firing down, trying to pin them. Nora dropped to a knee, steadying her rifle. Exhale, squeeze. Each shot sent another body tumbling down the steps. Fired beside her, his aim clumsy but his will solid. They climbed. At the top, the inner courtyard opened wide. It was larger than the rest, walled high, the floor littered with crates and sandbags, and at the far end, through the smoke, stood. For the first time, Nora saw him clearly. He wasn't tall, he wasn't armored like the myths whispered in mess halls. He was ordinary, that was what chilled her most. His face was calm, almost serene, his eyes dark and steady as they locked with hers. No fury, no surprise, just recognition. And in that recognition was power. Froze beside her, "That's." "Stay low," she hissed. Lifted his hand. Fighters surged from the shadows, pouring toward them like a tide. Delta fired back, the courtyard erupting in thunder. Grenades shattered sandbags, the blast tossing men into the air. Screams cut through the din. Nora fired until her rifle clicked empty. She slammed a fresh mag, movements mechanical, her focus never breaking from. He hadn't moved. He hadn't raised a weapon. He only watched, his eyes steady, his presence turning the fight into a game of his design. Then he smiled. The sight hit her harder than any bullet. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't mockery. It was recognition, as if he'd been waiting for this reunion. As if the years between Iron Anvil and now had been nothing but a pause in a conversation. Her pulse roared. She raised her rifle, sight locking on his chest. Exhale, squeeze. A flash. The shot came from the side. Her shoulder exploded with fire as the bullet punched through flesh. She dropped behind cover, teeth clenched, blood soaking her sleeve. Cried out, dragging her back, his young hands frantic against her vest. "You're hit, you're hit." "Keep firing," she snarled, pushing him back toward his rifle. Pain seared through her, but she ignored it, shoving gauze against the wound with one hand, firing with the other. Fighters closed in, the courtyard shrinking, the battle spiraling into chaos. Delta operators fell one by one. The floor slick with blood, the air heavy with dust and screams. Turned, stepping calmly toward the far exit. His men closed around him, shielding him, carrying him back into shadow. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. His message was clear. Not yet, not here. Nora's vision blurred, but her fury cut through it. She tried to rise, to push after him, but's grip was iron. "You can't," his voice cracked. "You'll die." She shoved against him weakly, blood soaking her arm. For a moment her chest collapsed under the weight of it all. Stevens' ghost. Smile. The soldiers bleeding out around her. The radio screamed again, Briggs' voice harsh with desperation. "All units now, I repeat, we've lost the element of surprise." Nora's head dropped back against the wall. The fight was gone, not lost entirely, but gone, had orchestrated it perfectly. He had let her see him, let her believe she was close, then ripped it away. It wasn't a defeat, it was a lesson. His hands pressed tight to her wound, his face pale, his eyes desperate. Stay with me, please stay with me. Her gaze met his, and for the first time in years she let her guard falter, just for a breath. I'm not leaving, she whispered. Her voice was raw, trembling with something deeper than pain. Not this time. Above them, the helicopters roared back into the valley. The operators dragged the wounded, firing as they fell back. The courtyard dissolved into retreat, into chaos, into the bitter taste of survival. Nora's eyes tracked the far exit one last time, where it vanished. Her body ached, her blood poured, but her mind burned with clarity. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Why was silence always louder after the storm? The rotor wash faded, leaving only the groan of wounded men and the rasp of boots dragging through dirt. Fob Mistral was alive with motion, but it wasn't victory that filled the air. It was exhaustion, defeat without surrender. Nora Caldwell lay on a stretcher inside the medical tent, her shoulder wrapped tight, the scent of antiseptic sharp in her nose. The pain throbbed steady, a dull reminder of how close she had come. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw him. Face calm, unhurried, his eyes locked with hers, his smile. She opened her eyes again, staring at the canvas ceiling until the blur steadied. She wasn't dead, but neither was he. Outside, voices carried, soldiers whispering, their words stitched with awe and fear. Ghost. They said it quietly, as if afraid to summon her by name. The myth had risen, but myths didn't bleed. Myths didn't win or lose. Myths didn't sit in medical tents with gauze soaking red. Cole pushed through the flap, his helmet tucked under his arm, dirt and blood streaking his face. He froze when he saw her, his mouth working before words came. "You should be resting," she said. Her voice was hoarse, softer than she intended. "So should you." His tone was fragile, but his eyes held steady. He stepped closer, setting the helmet down. For a moment he just stood there, as if trying to understand the weight of what he had seen. "You were right," he said finally. "Fear never leaves." He swallowed hard. "But neither does courage." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to tell him he'd done well, that he'd fought like a soldier despite the tremor in his hands. But praise felt cheap in the face of so much blood. Instead, she said, "You survived." His eyes glistened, though he blinked it away quickly. "Because of you." Nora turned her gaze toward the flap, unwilling to carry his gratitude. She didn't deserve it. Not yet. Not until was ash in the dirt. The flap lifted again. Major General Briggs entered, her stars catching the lamplight. The room stiffened, medics pausing mid-motion. Briggs waved them off, stepping close to the cot. "You saved lives today," she said evenly. Nora's eyes narrowed. "I lost them too." Briggs didn't flinch. "That's war, you know it better than anyone." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But you also know this isn't finished. He let you see him. He wanted you to feel it." Nora's jaw tightened. The words stung because they were true. Briggs set a folder on the cot. Another, thicker, heavier. "We've traced Chatter. He's moving north, rebuilding. He won't run from you, Caldwell. He'll wait. He'll want the fight." Nora stared at the folder, her hand resting on its cover. She didn't open it. Not yet. Briggs straightened, her eyes steady. "You have a choice. Go back to the desk. Let the myth remain a story, or pick this up and finish it." The weight in the words pressed down like a verdict. Briggs didn't wait for an answer. She turned and left, the flap falling shut behind her. Silence again, heavy, waiting. Stood awkwardly, shifting his weight. His eyes fell on the folder, then back to her. "What are you going to do?" Nora's hand tightened on the steel dog tags at her chest. They were cold against her skin, heavier than any weapon. She remembered Stevens, his laugh, his hand shoving her into survival, his voice telling her to live. She looked at the raw youth in his eyes, the fragile hope that hadn't been crushed by war yet. "What I should done years ago," she said quietly. He nodded slowly, as if he understood, though the truth was too heavy for him to carry. He turned, lifting the flap, letting dawn spill into the tent. The sky outside was pale gold, soft against the scars of smoke and fire. Nora closed her eyes for a breath. When she opened them, the weight of the choice was gone. There was no choice, only inevitability. She reached for the folder, opened it. His name stared back at her in black ink, bold as blood. Her lips parted, the words a whisper to herself, to the ghost of Stevens, to the silence that had followed her for years. This ends with me. The flap rustled as the wind slipped inside, carrying the faintest echo of voices from outside. Men moving, working, surviving, believing. Nora Caldwell sat on the cot, the myth of ghosts no longer a rumor, no longer buried, no longer. She wasn't hiding anymore. And in the stillness, in the weight of that truth, a quiet reflection took root. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.